Hare Krishna Krishna Hare 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 Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna. Krishna Krishna Hare Rama Hare Rama Hare Rama Hare Krishna Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama. Rama Rama Hare Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. 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 So reading from Srimad Bhagavatam, Canto 1, Chapter 9, The Passing Away of Ishmael. We'll start with text 18 through 21, and then we'll read the purport 21. This Sri Krishna is no other than the inconceivable original personality of Godhead. He is the first Narayan, the supreme enjoyer, but he is moving amongst the descendants of King Vrishni just like one of us, and he is bewildering us with his self-created energy.
O King, Lord Shiva, Narada, the sage amongst the demigods, and Kapila, the incarnation regarded, all know very confidentially about his glories through direct contact.
O King, a personality whom, out of ignorance only, you thought to be your maternal cousin, your very dear friend, well-wisher, counselor, messenger, benefactor, etc., is that very personality of Godhead, Sri Krishna.
Being the absolute personality of Godhead, he is present in everyone's heart. He is equally kind to everyone, and he is free from the false ego of differentiation. Therefore, whatever he does is free from material and negativity. He is equal balance.
Sarvatmana Samadrisho.
Sarvatmana
Sarvatmana Samadrisho. Yadvaya Syanam Katvikriti. Yadvaya Syanhanam Krite. Tat Kritamati Vaishamyam. Tat Kritamati Vaishnamyam. Niravadyasena Kvachit. Nirvadyasena Kvachit. Sarvatmana Samadrisho. Yadvasyayana Ankite. Tatkritamati Vaishamyam. Nirvadyasena Kvachit. Sarvatmana Samadrisho. Yadvayasyana Ankite. Tatkritamati Vaishamyam. Nirvadyasena Kvachit. To read the word for word together. Sarva one who is present in everyone's heart. Samajasha, one who is equally kind to one and all. Certainly, Advaryasta, of the absolute. Ahankakrita, free from all material identity of false ego. Tatkritam, everything done by him. Mati, consciousness. Vaishamyam, differentiation. Nirvadasa, freed from all attachment. No, never. Grudge at any stage. Translation and purport of His Divine Grace A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada. Being the absolute personality of Godhead, He is present in everyone's heart. He is equally kind to everyone, and He is free from the false ego of differentiation. Therefore, whatever He does is free from material inebriety. He is equibalanced. Someone like to read the purport?
Because he is absolute, there is nothing different from him. He is Kaivalya. There is nothing except himself. Everything and everyone is the manifestation of his energy, and thus he is present everywhere by his energy, being non-different from it. The sun is identified with every inch of the sun rays and every molecular particle of the rays. Similarly, the Lord is distributed by his different energies. He is Paramatma, or the Supersoul, present in everyone as the supreme guidance, and therefore he is already the chariot driver and counsel of all living beings. When he, therefore, exhibits himself as chariot driver of Arjuna, there is no change in his exalted position. It is the power of devotional service only that demonstrates him as the chariot driver or the messenger. Since he has nothing to do with the material conception of life because he is the absolute spiritual identity, there is for him no superior or inferior action. Being the absolute personality of Godhead, he has no false ego, and so he does not identify himself with anything different from him. The material conception of ego is equibalanced in him. He does not feel, therefore, inferior by becoming the chariot driver of his pure devotee. It is the glory of the pure devotee that only he can bring about service from the affectionate Lord.
So this section is full of nectar, I guess you could say. There's so much philosophy packed in here. Ishvara is given to Yudhishthira. As we've been reading in this chapter, that after the battlefield, so many kings, so many people were killed, slaughtered, you could say, on the battle, out of 6.4 million. There's different numbers, but large numbers of people killed. All that remained was 6 or 7 people survived. Everyone else was killed, and Yudhishthira was feeling very bad that he was the cause. For him to be king, so many people had to die. So much so that he couldn't be consoled. So finally Yudhishthira said, well, let's go talk to Bhishma. Bhishma can explain what's happening and why. And a ton of philosophy came in this. And we'll continue to come in this chapter about Bhishma Day, explaining to Yudhishthira why these things had to happen. And they finally pacified him. So in this verse, and we'll go back to some important points in the earlier verses we read, but this one's very profound. It talks about this idea. Two points jumped out to me. One is about the sun rays. So if you think about even a small plant will get some ray of sun, and it depends upon that to grow. And so the sun is intimately connected with every particle of sunshine. If you feel the sun on your face, you're feeling the potency or the essence of that sun glow, just with a single ray of sunshine. So in the same way, as Super Soul, God permeates everything. Super Soul, Paramatma, lives within every atom, and he's living in our heart. And so he's present. It's not that God is far away and disconnected from us, but he's very present, and he lives within our heart. And this other point about him becoming the servant of the devotee is very, very profound. There was a wonderful story, the Chaitanya Charitamrita, about a Brahmana who was reading. He was instructed by his guru to read the Bhagavad Gita every day, but he was illiterate. He couldn't actually read. And he would hold the Bhagavad Gita, sometimes upside down. He would turn the pages and try to read it as best he could, but because he was illiterate, he couldn't get very far. And other people made fun of him. Look at this person pretending to read and pretending to study the Bhagavad Gita. And he would have tears in his eyes sometimes when he was reading. Lord Chaitanya saw him and said, so why are you crying? What's the difficulty? And the Brahmana explained that this idea that Krishna, the Supreme Lord, has become the chariot driver of Arjuna, and to become his servant out of love, it just evokes deep emotion, and I can't help but cry. And so Lord Chaitanya said, yes, you are the true scholar of Bhagavad Gita. You understand the message of Bhagavad Gita. And so then all these people who would make fun of him were put to rest, because he actually understood the Bhagavad Gita, that Krishna takes great pleasure in becoming subordinate to his devotees, to serving them. Whatever he does is the right thing. God is all good, and anything he does is the right thing. He'll remain invisible to the atheists. They don't want to see him, so he'll say, okay, that's fine. He'll give them the intelligence by which they cannot see him. Here's evidence I don't exist, because they don't want to see him. And yet for devotees who just aim to serve him and please him, he gets more pleasure. He's very greedy, you could say. Krishna is very hungry for the love of his devotees. And this is exhibited in many ways with the Damodar pastime, where Yashoda would tie him up. Krishna just behaved as very much like a very naughty child, so that he could feel the affection of his mother. And with Arjuna, he's happy. A chariot driver is not an honorable position. In Vedic, if we don't have chariots now, we have tanks and other modern machinery. But a chariot driver gets all the dirt from the hooves. He's got to take orders and from the chariot driver. It's I guess modern day it's maybe like a cab driver or something. It's not an honorable position. People didn't walk around bragging about being, I'm a chariot driver. It's considered something that was degrading. And yet Krishna gladly took that position because of his love for Arjuna. So that's an important point here, that this super soul is there. And it's not to be taken lightly, that if we stop and think anytime we're in difficulty, or even if we're not in difficulty, we're happy, if we stop and understand that the Supreme Lord is living in our heart. And what to speak of living there, the nature of the soul is also divine. We're divine entities, Satchidananda. But we've forgotten that. We identify, and mentioned here in the Sanskrit, we had this word, ahankritahe, right? Free from all designations of false ego. So this ahankara, this sense of I. I'm the controller. I'm this body, my mind is my identity. Of course, Krishna doesn't have that, but we have that very much, and so we forget that we're spiritual entities. But when we stop and think, well, maybe I've forgotten, but Krishna's not forgotten. He's in my heart. So what do I do, Krishna? How do I get out of this? And in this conditioned, covered state that I'm in, what can I do to become free from this entanglement? And he's there as the supreme guide. So he'll help us extricate ourselves. He's actually waiting. Krishna is more eager for us to be disentangled than we are. And so he's constantly waiting just to for us to ask, for us to be willing to accept some instruction, some guidance. And so then when we inquire, he'll guide us very happily through his books, and within the heart, through the association of devotees, through the spiritual master. He'll say, oh yes, if you want to come out, here's how you can come out. So this is a very powerful verse in purport. And those are the couple of points that jumped out at me. If we go back to text 18, the first one we read, there's an interesting statement here in the translation of the second half of the last sentence. It says, he is bewildering us with his self-created energy. And then it talks about, so that's one point that we'll talk about. And then in the purport, it talks about this Vedic system requiring knowledge is the deductive process. So we'll start with that and we'll come back to the bewildering part. And so this is the Vedic system, that the Vedas are there. It's described in the Vedas, the movement of time, the size of an atom. There's medical information, there's laws of how to govern society. There's tons of knowledge in the Vedas. But sometimes people just think, well, these are just stories, or these are just myths, this Mahabharata. There was a devotee, the late Sadaputa, I don't know if you may have heard him. He was a mathematician. His PhD, I think he was a mathematician, but he was a scientist. He wrote a lot of books. He was a devotee. And one of the books, I used to help them, was administrating in their office, and it was thrilling to sit around at lunchtime and hear about their ideas. He and Judah Karma, who wrote a treatise on forbidden archaeology about Darwin's theory and things. And they were talking about projects. So they're working on this, that's occupying all their time. And at lunchtime, when they were just kind of relaxing, they would just talk about other projects they'd like to do. They had a longer list of projects they wanted to do than there was time in the day to do. So there was always a backlog, and whenever that time, you think, what's the next project? So one of the projects that Sadaputa wanted to do was write a book in Puri, Jagannath Puri. There's a book they keep, a record of all the kings of Orissa. The current king of Orissa is so-and-so. Before him was so-and-so. Before him was so-and-so. So they have a list of all the kings of Orissa going all the way back to Yudhisthira. And so with that document and some other archaeological things that you can find and some other information, Sadaputa was confident he could write a book showing that the Battle of Kurukshetra was a historical event. Bhagavad Gita is a historical event. It's not a myth. It's not a story. Mahabharata isn't just some story that the grandmother told the kids. It's actually happened. And here's proof that it happened. Here's evidence. And so so the point I'm trying to get to is that in the Vedas have all this information. In modern days, we take science to be authoritative, and we say, well, these are just stories, these are just things, I can believe them or not. But the Vedas we accept, devotees accept as authoritative because they descend, they come from above, they come from a place of knowledge. In modern, I don't want to pick on scientists, because science, there's nothing wrong with science. It has a process and there's a lot of work, and we have light bulbs and heaters and so many microwave ovens and cameras and laptop computers based on science. So it by itself is not necessarily atheistic, but a common tendency is of that type of thinking is that if I can't measure it and see it, then it doesn't exist. It's not real. I have to be able to put an instrument and measure it. Otherwise, I can't prove it that it exists. So then they'll discard the soul or these other things. But the idea of accepting authority is there in science. I'm not a scientist, so I shouldn't say what I'm about to say, but I'm going to say it anyway. There are laws, I don't know the names of them, but if you study physics, quantum physics, or different of the sciences, they have law, like we have the law of gravity. It's not that they fully understand it, but it's accepted. It's a law, we can see that it has an effect. And there are other laws that mathematicians use and physics use that they just accept as a premise. This law is there, therefore we can do these calculations. Well, no one can prove that that law is real, but they all accept it. It's the basis of their work. You have another example. If I ask you how far the sun away is from the Earth, who can answer that? 93 million miles. Billion. So that's the number I grew up with, and I just accept it. Okay, well, maybe it's true. Probably true. I don't know. I can't measure. Have I measured it? No. But somebody can calculate. And so I'll accept, okay, well, maybe it's that far away. And the doctor, you go to the doctor and he tells you, well, this is what's wrong. You need to take this. Do I know that that's actually true or not? No, but he studied and he knows what he's doing. And I take a prescription. I feel better. So there's an authority which I'll accept information from, even though I can't prove the validity of that information. But I accept that this person has some authority, they're knowledgeable. Of course, in this day and age, you have to check to make sure he's a good doctor. There's doctors that you may not want to trust, but generally speaking, the point is we accept all the time on authority that things are going to happen or things are a certain way. So why do we then reject the Vedas and this authority saying that's what the point of this purport in text 18 is that the Vedas are there, they give us information, we say, oh no, I can't accept that because I can't prove it. Well, we accept things all the time we can't prove. And so the idea of accepting information and authority, it's there in science, it's in the modern world. But current, the way I was raised in America and in most parts of the world, the current thinking is that, well, you can't just accept all these old stories because you don't know if they're true. Therefore, we have to, just work with modern science. There's a wonderful documentary about this called Expelled by Ben Stein. The subtitle is No Intelligence Allowed. And basically the whole documentary shows that when you take God out of the classroom, or you can't discuss God or spiritual reality, the soul, etc., then you end up with a society that tolerates someone like Hitler to obliterate so many millions of people. That becomes acceptable because if God doesn't exist, we can make up our own rules. And so atheism has a destructive side to it. And he gives a lot of evidence about scholars, people had tenure professors. They're not saying they believe in God. They just make a comment like, well, there's so much information in the DNA that maybe there's some intelligence. We should discuss this. We should try to understand, why does this DNA look like it had some intelligence behind it? Just for saying that, their career's finished. It's like, oh, you can't, no, you can't teach. We'll put you in the basement and you can just, run the copy machine. Because they're alluding to the fact that there's something out there intelligent beyond a human being, and you can't measure it or see it. And so this concept of intelligent design is like, oh, you're a fanatical Christian if you believe in intelligent design. And the professors aren't saying that. They're just saying, well, there's intelligence. There's clearly intelligence in your DNA. Anybody with a fourth grade education or more, you can look at the DNA and understand there's so much information. It's organized. It couldn't have been accidental. You don't throw a bomb in a room and walk out with an iPhone. I mean, if I said this iPhone has assembled itself because the elements were there, no, that's ludicrous, right? And yet the common thinking is, well, there was a big explosion, and then out of that explosion, this Big Bang, we have all the planets and organization, and everything works very nicely. So we don't see that in nature. So the point is, of the purport is this idea of accepting knowledge from an authority is not unheard of. It's something we do every day. And that's the Vedic system of learning, is you accept it, especially for spiritual knowledge. You wouldn't try to teach yourself to do brain surgery. You would learn and study under someone who's done it, who can tell you what you need to know. And that's true for music, for medical, doctor, anything you want to learn, construction, anything you want to learn. If you look at someone who's really good at what they do, ask them, well, who do they learn from? And they're going to point to a person. Well, so-and-so taught me all these things. So the idea of knowledge passing down is common in the secular or the non-spiritual world. And it's also the way that knowledge is passed spiritually. You get it from someone who has it. And they got it from somebody who has it. And so this is the Vedic system of acquiring knowledge. It's passed down from someone who knows. And then more on that point, I think it was the next verse. In text 19, there's this statement in the second half of the last sentence. I'll just read the whole purport. It's one sentence. O King, Lord Shiva, Narada, the sage amongst the demigods, and Kapila, so he's mentioned in three personalities, the incarnation of Godhead. They all know very confidentially about his glories, his capital H is referring to Krishna, about his glories through direct contact. And so again, we can accept this deductive knowledge. We can accept knowledge from coming down from above through the parampara, the disciplic succession, through a teacher, through someone else, because they have it, because they got it from someone who has it. And it goes all the way back to Narada. That through direct contact with the Supreme Lord, then he's there, he sees it. And this idea is, we tend to think about understanding God or accepting his existence as being based on faith, that I trust it. And the Christians, I was raised in a Christian household, and so I sort of saturated with that kind of thinking. And that word is used a lot, faith. We have to have faith in God. But here, this direct contact, it may start out, Shraddha, one of the beginning steps in spiritual life is Shraddha, to exhibit a little bit of faith. But the thing about faith is it's very powerful, and it's like a muscle. It gets stronger the more you use it. And there's a beautiful verse in the Bible I really like. It's Romans 8:28. It says, faith is the evidence, the substance of things hoped for, the evidence of things not seen. So if you stop and study that, faith is not just a mental construct that we say, I'm going to believe in something. It's actually, and in the beginning it may be very small, but as soon as you do something, somebody you trust says, well, if you do this, you'll get this result. I remember when I first met the devotees, they were a little bit far out from what I was used to, and they said, well, if you do this, if you chant this mantra, if you offer your food, if you do these practices, you'll be happy and you'll perceive spiritual reality. And I thought, well, this all sounds a little too simple. But I was used to complicated things, and I'm like, so I just have to chant this mantra, and there's 3 words, 16 words on beads, and offer my food. But I had a little faith. I said, well, what do I have to lose? I've done crazier things in my life and they didn't make me happy, so I'll try it. And immediately my heart started dancing. I said, well, what is this going on? I've never experienced this. So then my faith got stronger. It's like, wow, well, let me do some more. Let me read these books and understand more about this. And the more I would read it and then see more far out things and try them, then I would experience it. So then that faith transformed into something that's experiential. And I would tell somebody about, Krishna consciousness or the Maha Mantra, and they would look at me like I'm insane. I'm like, no, you don't understand. This is real. Like, I've experienced it. It's real. You can experience it too. You try it. It's not faith anymore. Now it's knowledge. It's realization. So this idea that faith is the substance of things hoped for. I want this thing in the future. That thing I want, I'm experiencing it now. The evidence of things not seen. So it's very, very powerful. And so this direct contact that's described is important. And that's why we accept the parampara, because we're accepting from a spiritual master, from devotees. They know these things to be true because they've experienced it, because they received it. And so we're getting the real deal. So that's what kind of jumped out at me in text 19. There's another point in the purport that's described about entanglement and difficulty. There's one statement in particular, this is Krishna speaking. He says, I put my devotee into difficulty, and thus the devotee becomes more purified in exchanging transcendental bhava with me. Bhava is a word for very extreme, condensed, powerful love. And so this idea of difficulty, and it mentioned that in the first text too, in text 18, it talked about bewildered. He is bewildering us, right? So he bewilders us with his, we'll talk about that in another verse, so I'll come back to that. But this idea about putting us into difficulty, it's, if there's a statement that's a little difficult to hear, a little painful to hear, but when you've experienced it, then it becomes very sweet. It says, if Krishna likes you, he gives you things. If he loves you, he takes things away. It's like, well, no, none of us want things taken away. But what he's taking away from us are things that aren't good for us. They're bad habits or anarthas or attachments. And it might be painful when it happens, but then afterwards we're very relieved, we feel lighter, we feel happier. And he's taking away those things which are making us unhappy and getting in the way. It's like a balloon. If you have a hot air balloon, the balloon wants to go up. All you have to do is take the ballast out of it. You take the weights out of it, and it's going to go up. You don't have to push it. It stays down because you have some weights in it. And so he's just taking away the weights. He's taking away those anchors, those things that are holding us back. And so then we realize when he really loves us, he takes away those obstacles. They may appear like things that you don't want taken away. An example is the prayers of Queen Kuti, where she prays for difficulty, come again and again. Why does she pray for difficulty? Does she like difficulty? No, she doesn't like difficulty, but she really likes seeing Krishna and being with him, because then when Krishna's there and you're looking at his smiling face, you're happy. Your troubles are over. And when there's difficulty, you pray to him and then he comes, then that difficulty becomes a wonderful thing, because if I didn't have difficulty, I wouldn't be able to sincerely call out to him, and then I might forget him. And so she's understanding that, let the difficulty come, because then I can remember you. Now, as we become more practiced in our spiritual life, we can remember Krishna even when it's not difficult. In the beginning, difficulty helps us. Difficulty is really good at providing focus. We sort of, when you have some very difficult thing in front of you, you practically speaking can't think of anything else. I just need to solve this problem. Other things become less, even eating and sleeping, other things just become not so important if it's a really bad problem. So difficulty can focus us. But when we learn to have that same focus on Krishna in any time, we don't need the difficulty. Suffering is not required. but it may help us in certain cases. So that's what's being described here. That sometimes Krishna, to increase our love for him, will put us in some difficulty. Then we can call out to him, and then he comes. Yes, how can I help you? Excuse me. And so then in text 20 here, in the verse, in the translation, it mentions, O king, that personality whom out of ignorance only you thought to be your maternal cousin. So he's speaking to Yudhisthira, and Krishna used to interact with the Pandavas. And so Bhishma is telling him that, this person, your cousin, he's actually the Supreme Lord, but out of your ignorance only, you didn't see that. So this ignorance isn't, it's not like a material ignorance. Krishna, and there's another verse, I don't know if I marked it, it's, maybe we'll come across it, but it mentioned it in one of the purports that this idea of bewilderment comes up a couple times in these purports. And the fact is, the living entity jivas are always, you could say, bewildered or controlled in one way or another. And so there's three primary energies. There's the spiritual energy, and there's the material energy, and then there's what's called marginal energy in the middle. That's the jiva, that's us. So we're going to be, by nature, because we're sort of, you could say, neutral, we're going to be influenced. You can call it controlled, you can call it bewildered. We're going to be affected by one of these two energies, either the spiritual energy or the material energy. We're not going to be unaffected because we're not supreme. We're marginal. We're just like, we're in between. So something's going to influence us. If we're not being influenced by the spiritual energy, then we're going to be influenced by the material energy, and vice versa. Something is going to dominate us. Because we have free will, Krishna doesn't force. He doesn't force either one of these energies to affect us. We choose through our desires, through our actions, we choose which energy we subscribe to. I'm a materialist, I just want money and I just want prestige and I'm going to do this and this. Okay, those actions are going to put you under the stringent control of material energies. Or no, I don't want, I want to get rid of my false ego, I want to develop humility, I want to understand who God is. So we make choices based on the spiritual life. So we say, okay, you want that? Then you'll be controlled and dominated by the spiritual energies. So that bewildering effect, Yoga Maya or Mahamaya, that's what's being referred to. In this case, this ignorance being described with Yudhisthira and the Pandavas. They were dear friends of Krishna. And it's very hard to have a really loving relationship with someone if you see their material potencies. I'll give you an example. The example that always comes to me is the story of the judge, Mr. Judge. Mr. Judge has robes at work and everyone calls him Your Honor. But his friends, they don't call him Your Honor, they play golf with him, and Mr. Judge happens to not be a good golfer, so they tease him, Bob, you're a lousy golfer. If they said that in the courtroom, it's like contempt of court, you get punished. But they're not in the courtroom, they're on the golf course, and so they joke with him. They like him, but they joke with him about how he's a bad golfer. And it's affection, and the judge likes it because they're friendly with him. He doesn't want them to say Your Honor. And the judge goes home, and his granddaughter climbs on his back and pulls his hair and rides him like a horse and kicks him. And he's even happier there than he is on the golf course because this is love, and he'll let his grandfather do whatever he wants to them. He won't let him do that in the courtroom because it's not appropriate. But the point is, he gets more pleasure from his granddaughter, who has no concept of judge or Your Honor. She could care less. She just knows that he's fun to play with. So this is Krishna. This is a perfect example of Krishna. This Yoga Maya on the Pandavas bewilders them to think, oh, he's just our cousin, he's our friend, we can talk to him as a friend. So it's very intimate, and they can exchange things and tease each other and play, and they can exchange love. If they saw him as the Supreme Personality of Godhead, it's hard to tease him because it's just difficult to do. If the president walks in your room, you're probably not going to tease him because he's the president. And so this Yoga Maya, this is actually in Vrindavan. You can think of it like Krishna handing the keys over to his devotees. and he lets his life be controlled by what his devotees want. And they don't see him as God, they see him as their best friend. And so it's very loving exchanges. So this is what's being described here by Bhishma to Eunistor about this. You think out of ignorance, you think him your maternal cousin, your dear friend, etc. He's actually the Supreme Personality of Godhead. And I think we already talked about text 21 talked about, we already talked about that with the sun rays and the service. So those are just the points that jumped out at me at these verses and these purports. I guess I'd like to maybe stop there and ask if any of you have any questions or if anything in what we read struck you as being notable. Or if you have any corrections for me or yes. Do you have a microphone?
Prabhuji, I happened to listen to class by Bhaktivedanta Maharaj just recently. He's a former biologist, scientist. So he's using his scientific approach to bhakti. And he said, he was speaking about material science, and he said, premise of all material science, it's rooted in some sort of faith. It has to start with faith. It can't start with actual fact, like you said, there was a Big Bang theory, all of that stuff. You have to put your faith into something to start. It's like it's a starting point. So science and faith and religion, they have to go hand in hand. You can deny it. And in fact, he says that the demons are the great scientists. The problem, he said scientists, how they become demons is throughout their study, throughout their analysis, they come to the point that, okay, there is somebody behind it. And that's when they become demons because they can't accept it. And science explains how, but not why. Like if a child asks his mother why the sky is blue, she can explain, well, the light breaks in a certain way, and that's how you see it blue. It's not actually blue, but it doesn't explain why it's blue. So it's a trick, or sometimes they just shrug it off. It's not important. If if a child asks for an important question of life, parents can shrug it off. It's not important. Just leave me alone. And the child, he accepts it as those questions not being scientific, and he stops asking those questions for the rest of his life. It's very dangerous.
Yeah, that's true. It's very discouraging. And it's a good point because if you look at Einstein or Newton, I think Newton was the law of gravity. A lot of the what we call scientists, they were using their science or intelligence to try to. They believed in God, and so therefore trying to understand how does God do this? How do his energies work? It's a given that he exists. We accept that, but it's fascinating how this stuff works. But then they pick it apart. And I think I heard a class recently by Bhaktivedanta Maharaj. He talked about how the scientific method pulls everything apart. So we're going to pull it apart to study this piece minutely, and they get really detailed in this piece, but now it's separated from the whole. So they lose the perspective. So, well, it's just all about this one piece. Well, you can't separate the parts from the whole. You can study the parts, but you have to study them in relationship with the whole. And yeah, we tend to not do that. It's all about how, not why. And so yeah, one mark, I explain the rest. Thank you for that.
Yeah, the base that we build on, it's called an axiom. Axiom, that's what it's called. The given that we build everything else, but it's called axiom.
That's that foundation. So that's the faith, right? There's some axiom. And you'll see this word a lot in physics or whatever you're studying. I don't know about mathematics, but there'll be an axiom, which is a fundamental principle or something. But they don't understand or can explain it. It's just accepted. Everyone accepts that. And then they build on that. Well, that's faith. They're trusting that that's there. So, yeah, thank you. Anyone else have any thoughts, reflections? Yes.
The question like who we put together, but does this play into the word of epistemology, how somebody knows that they know something. Like when you say that they just accept the law of gravity, it's like they're acknowledging that they don't know.
Yeah, I think it does, and I'm not a scholar or a scientist, so I can't speak to it. But like this idea of an axiom, everybody, we all have to start somewhere, and so then, and so yeah, we have to acknowledge even that in the beginning the scientists, and they don't know. There was, I wish I could remember this thing. It was one of the students in a Bhakti Yoga Club. He's a PhD student, and maybe some of you have heard this because I'll probably get it wrong. That when you're first starting out, like as an undergraduate, you know everything, or you think you know. I can't remember how it goes. You think you know everything, and then as you learn more, you realize, well, you know some things, and some other people know some things, and when you become a PhD, you realize I know nothing, because basically, the more you learn in any field, the more you realize how much you don't know. So you might know this one thing better than anyone on the planet, but that one thing is surrounded by a billion things you don't know about, and so it's, so yeah, everyone has to start at that point of I don't, I have to accept some guide or something, because what do we know, especially in the beginning. The challenge is to become humble, to remain humble, because the risk is the more knowledge we acquire, the more we can become puffed up. And because we're divine beings at heart, humility is really, really important to maintain. Because as soon as we lose humility, we get bewildered and then we get entangled. Yeah, so 2 hands. Yeah, here's the microphone. So we'll start with you. And then, go ahead, your hand up first. You go.
Might have just answered my question with that last point, but I was going to ask how, if we come from academic backgrounds and you hold a degree, if you had a career before Krishna consciousness in science and engineering, technology, is it often more entangling to have high education and these backgrounds when seeking to dovetail it in Krishna consciousness? Or is it often more perhaps beneficial? It's a broad question, but how would you answer that?
It's a good question, and it can go either way. It can be more difficult. Like Vinod Thakur, he states, the more educated we become, the more ignorant we become. Because most education is just about the material energies: earth, air, fire, water, ether, mind, intelligence, false ego. That's all material. So most degrees in most universities, they're just dealing with material elements. So you can be very, very educated, but you're just dealing in this realm. And the soul, the transcendental phase, you know nothing about. That being said, I've had a career in the not academia, but I've worked in a lot of big companies, National Geographic, Discovery, and such, and having qualifications, whether it's mechanical or industrial or technical or academic, whatever they are. We have devotees. Radha Kraman, he's a PhD, not sure what his PhD is, in comparative religion or something. He's a Sanskrit expert. He's teaching, he's in academia and dovetailing it very well. So you can do it because you can see those energies at work, and you can understand how they work, and then you can explain spirituality. Srila Prabhupada asked his scientists, the late Bhakti Shup Damodar Maharaj and the late Sadaputa, they both had PhDs, one in physics, one in mathematics. He asked them to write books and teach people and show them the existence of God, like prove the existence of God through science. And because they had very strong intellect, and so therefore he was asking them directly, use that capability to explain to people how God is real. And Sadaputa, his classes were mind-blowing. He would describe in terms of molecular atomic structure how the super soul in the heart, we don't have desire, basically, it's a super soul. And if you look at robotics, if you think about taking a drink of water, lifting this book, the calculations required to lift this book or to put on my glasses, a drink of water, it would be hundreds of thousands of lines of code to do that. We're not doing any of that. We're just thinking, I want to pick up my glasses. And the super soul is doing everything else. Super soul is telling the muscle, okay, this muscle, pull this hard, lift this, go at this angle, now the glasses are on my head, or I drink my water. I'm not conscious of any of that. I just know I want to drink water. So actually, the super soul is controlling everything. So he would explain that in the Bhagavatam class in terms of physics, So it can go either way. The important thing, at least from my experience, is to understand that the intelligence with which you acquired that degree, the ability to put in the effort and the research and the study, that the fact that you have intelligence that can comprehend these things, and you put in the ability to learn it, that's not yours. You didn't invent that. That was given to you. So this degree belongs to Krishna because the intelligence used to get it is his intelligence. He let me borrow it. And then we can remain humble. And then these things don't bewilder us. And we can see how to use them in Krishna service. And there's a lot of wonderful devotees who have degrees, even increasingly, and they're using them very effectively in presenting Krishna consciousness or just helping the world, be a better place, and both in their personal lives and in the world at large. So it can help. It can also be bewildering. If we're not careful, then we get carried away and we lose faith in this Vedic process of deductive accepting knowledge, and we start to think, well, I have to prove it all. So there's a risk there, but if we associate with devotees, it can be done. Some people have the ability to do it and the desire, that's fine. It's not that you shouldn't do it or that you should do it. Each of us is individual. I don't know if that answers your question.
Case by case. So having the piece of paper qualification is less conducive because it can be bewildering to the ego. Though having the knowledge of the topic to be able to actually show, like, look, this is how this is connected to Krishna.
Yeah, and having the degree may help you get into places that someone without the degree can't get into. And then they can have a discussion that other, so it's just like Sri Prabhupada gives the Christian Science as this phrase in the front of their books. It says, nothing is either good or bad, but thinking makes it so. So Prabhupada says the same thing, and he uses the example of a surgeon. A knife, is a knife good or is a knife bad? In the hands of a thief or a rogue, it's a bad thing. You could hurt somebody with it, and you see examples of that. In the hand of a surgeon, it's a good thing. So you can cut out a disease, a tumor or something. So the knife is neutral. But if it's used wrongly, you get cut and you get injured. If it's used properly, you can heal. So the diploma is not good or bad. It depends on how it's used, but we just have to be aware of these dynamics that we don't get bewildered. Nate, you had a question?
Like time for this, but I just was thinking about like evolution lately, and I just what's like the Christian conscious stance? Like what do we say? Because you spent some time with the writer of Forbidden Archaeology, right? And you're part of National Geographic, so I think this might be something that's been in your mind before.
Well, it's a big topic. We don't really have time to go over it now. And just to set the record straight or clarify, I was just a technician. I worked in IT and computers. I wasn't like a knowledge person. And I was an office assistant with Sadhguru and Judah Karma. I don't have big intelligence like they do. Although it is interesting that both Discovery, who has a whole host of channels, Discovery Channel, TLC, and all these things, and at National Geographic, in their halls, they have a copy of Forbidden Archaeology on their shelves. They use it for research, which is interesting. I don't know if I can give you the Krishna conscious, perspective on evolution. There is some some things do evolve, some forms evolve, but the basic point of forbidden archaeology is that there are gaps in Darwin's theory. There's evidence that, some number of billions of years ago, they find this bone of a dinosaur. They also find a metal sphere that can only be created by an intelligent. So it's not to establish like what we are theory is. Vedic wrote a book about de-evolution, which how the soul descends, and we evolve through species, right? The birth and death, the living, the soul goes from body to body and evolves through in that way. But the main point of the book wasn't so much to establish what evolution means, it was just to show there are flaws in this theory. There's scientific evidence that goes against Darwin's theory. So the theory needs to be revised. What that revision looks like, I can't say, but the point is we accept as given this knowledge, but there's evidence that show, well, if this is true, this can't be true. And that's the point of the whole 900 pages of scientific evidence. They didn't write it. This is evidence that lives in the museums. It says, well, this, the problem here. And they're just pointing that out. They're not drawing a conclusion and telling you what to think. They're just saying, well, we accept this as a given, but all this stuff says something different. And then they leave it at that for people to, do their own discovery. That's probably about all I can answer now because I think I'm over time already. So stop. We can talk about it during breakfast. Granthara Shyam Bhagavatam ki jai, Srila Prabhupada ki jai.
Hey, devotees, we have a serious problem here. Boarding a lot of the bowls and spoons, so please bring them to the dish room when you can. Right now, there's not enough food. It's Whoa! Yeah, right. Sorry. Sorry.
Got it.
Yeah.
Oh, where are you? Well, that's forgiveness of release. So the computer's here, right?
Yeah.
Will you sit here or will you sit
Yeah.
here?
I'm definitely sending the link now.